Well, almost 13 years ago now, my nephew, who was 5 years old at the time, was diagnosed with cancer. And his mom was in nursing school. And she had a professor who asked her if she'd looked at the role of nutrition in cancer. And at the time, they had a small hobby farm. They had their own pig and cow that they were growing for meat. She taught me how to pull mozzarella cheese. She also had a huge garden, but she read
Mm.
the book that her professor had sent her home with, which was the China study, and called and said, "You have to read this." And they went vegan overnight. And that was really the start for me. And I read that book, and initially I was just honestly really angry because I'd never heard any of this before. And I couldn't believe this
Yeah.
information was out there and I'd never heard it. I'd always had high cholesterol and been told to, start taking cholesterol medication, which I had never wanted to do because my dad had been on cholesterol medication my whole life. And he would go from medication to medication, switching because he would have some odd side effect, like losing his taste or something like that. And so,
Mm.
finding this out that you could eat differently and affect the health of your body and maybe not end up getting some of the diseases that were in our family was just really life changing. So that was the beginning of our journey. Our kids were 6 and 8 at the time. We had 12 chickens at home. My daughter had a little egg business that she sold organic eggs to our neighbors. But we gave it a go. After reading the book, we did like a 10-day Dr. John McDougall had a free online thing. And so I got my blood work drawn, and we ate this way for 10 days, and I went back in, and I couldn't get back in until day 17. But when I did, my doctor said, "What did you do?" Because your cholesterol dropped 50 points in 17 days, and I couldn't do that with
Wow.
medication. So whatever you did, keep doing it.
Wow, that's incredible. So it's the China study was the book that you picked up originally that the doctor had given. That's quite unusual from my experience of chatting with doctors that a doctor would be aware of that, or at least not even just aware, but comfortable enough to tell a patient or somebody that was in their care to read this book. Were you quite taken aback? Had you heard anything of that sort of nature in the past?
Honestly, I really had not. And no, the doctor we were going to at the time did have a few, like he had a Dean Ornish book and a Dr. McDougall book on it, like in the waiting room, down on the shelf.
Right.
But I had never heard of those names, brought up anywhere. He also had on the back of his, behind his desk, he had like low fat turkey slices, like all these examples of better foods, which was kind of confusing in the beginning. After we made this change, I was like, why do you still
Mm.
have, turkey slices on your shelf? And his thing was that a lot of people won't go cold turkey, pun intended, but they won't make the switch. So
Mm.
he was trying to get people to ease into it. But no, I haven't heard very many people who stumbled upon being vegan because their doctor told them, which is a really tragic thing, I think, in our society. I think that's where we should be getting a lot better
Yeah.
information about our health and what we can do on our own. Yeah.
Yeah. And did you? What was the transition like? Were you? You said you had 14 chickens, and your sister had the pig, and so on and so forth. So it was a lot of kind of small holding style animal agriculture, like in your vicinity. What was that transition like? Were you from there to whole food, plant based, no oil instantly, or was there a slow transition?
I would say we kind of did it all. We started with that, really big change for 10 days and cut out everything. We went whole food, plant based, no oil. And that was what gave us that change in such a short amount of time
Right.
that really proved to me this really works. So at the time, at the end of those, 17 days, it was both really good news and really bad news that it worked. When our, doctor said, well, keep doing it, was like, 13 years ago, there wasn't a lot out there, it didn't feel like, about, eating whole food, plant based, no oil. So I started doing internet research and all that, and cooking recipes that were free, online kind of thing. And we really tried to be, eat that way completely at home. And we decided early on that if we went to friends' houses or we went to, see family and they cooked us a meal, we weren't going to be rude and say, no, we're not going to eat this. We just decided we'll eat this way at home.
Right.
And then when we go out, we can eat however we want. But my son went to a birthday party, and I can't remember if he had 12 hot dogs and 6 cookies, or 6 cookies and 12 hot dogs. But, it was like free for all. And that's when we realized, okay, maybe this isn't the best approach. Maybe this totally black and white thing doesn't work so well. So we tried to just rein it in a little and just say, okay, well, when we're at home, we eat this way, but if you go out, you can choose to have something different. So for a time period, it was, if we went out with friends, ordered pizza or something, the kids would order pepperoni pizza, but then they would get stomach aches afterwards. See, they wouldn't feel very well. And they were young enough to make the connection that, oh, when I eat this, I don't feel good.
Right.
And they didn't have the same emotional ties like I think some adults do to food. So it was a little bit easier for them to let go of things, I think, than it was for even my husband and I. But yeah, so we kind of landed in the middle, for in the beginning, trying to figure out how do we make this work. And really, it was helpful to let the kids figure it out for themselves in some way. At home, we didn't have anything that wasn't whole food, plant-based, no oil. So at home, it wasn't difficult. But it did take a season of them choosing on their own, when they weren't at home to eat this way. And it helped. They would go to friends' houses. They'd be so excited to have, boxed mac and cheese, oh, we're going to have this treat for lunch at my friend's house. And then they'd come home and go, oh, it didn't taste as good as I remembered. I like our cashew mac and cheese better. So, it took a bit of time, but we attempted to go black and white.
Really interesting that the kids, so often when I speak to people who've got kids, that it's the opposite experience almost. Their kids sort of, especially if they're a little older. Mine's really young, so he's literally known nothing else, so it's fine. Not that we're fully, I must confess, whole foods, and we're certainly not no oil. But we, everything we have obviously is vegan and so on and so forth. So he's comfortable with the concept, and he's comfortable with the concept of he doesn't eat a lot of the things his friends do, and it's all quite fine. But some of our friends who've got kids who are slightly older have had some challenges where their kids have, as they've gone elsewhere, they've wanted the hot dog, they wanted the pizza, the trips to McDonald's, so often it's the social stuff that they're missing. So it's kind of really interesting that I love that approach that you gave your kids the kind of choice, and then they actually just through how they were feeling came back the other way. It's really fascinating to me.
Yeah, the middle school years and early high school, I think were definitely the hardest because, by late elementary school, they were used to eating this way and it was fine. But then when you get into those social situations and there's more kind of peer pressure, you want to be like your friends and all that, that was difficult. And even their friends, they would eat lunch outside. And I remember one of my daughter's friends was like, well, there's some grass, you should eat it because you're vegan, or their friends would make fun of them if their friends had something that wasn't vegan, some treat they brought, and they'd say, okay, I'll try a bite. And then oh, you can't, you're vegan, So they definitely went through those stages as well. But then later in high school, it kind of switched and became this interesting thing. Then their friends were curious about it, especially once they started getting acne and everything for our kids, their friends would be like, well, what do you do? What do you do to your face? How come you don't have acne? And then, they would say, well, here, I have an article actually, if you want to read it, those kind of things. But, and some of their friends have made choices to be vegan as well, or vegetarian. And that was really rewarding for them to see. But I think I didn't shield them from the real information. I mean, I didn't show them, graphic documentaries when they were young or anything, but I also explained why we were doing what we were doing. So I think my kids know way too much about concentrated animal feeding operations and all the evils behind our food system. But I thought it was important that they know why. But they also had teachers in elementary school who, would say, well, are you eating enough protein? They would ask if, our
Mm,
kids were okay, which was just astounding. One day at lunch,
yeah.
somebody, my daughter's friend had a liver sandwich, and my husband had packed in their lunches this after Halloween, had put a candy bar in there. They're like, you can't have the candy bar, and she's like, this kid's eating a liver sandwich. It's horrible. So yeah, there were funny
Yeah.
expectations along the way.
Did you find that as parents as well, that you ended up in conversations either with other parents, with teachers, with maybe other healthcare professionals who weren't perhaps your doctor who suggested the China study, like down the line, where there was almost a sort of a suspicion from them about what you were doing? I mean, I certainly have had that experience where other parents almost, they ask questions with a little bit of suspicion, a little bit of skepticism, almost. I wouldn't. I don't know if I would go so far as to say this, but almost as if like you're harming your children in some way by doing this. There's a kind of inference of that somewhere in what they're asking. Have you had that experience?
Completely. Yes. Yeah. And at first I was kind of it was just off-putting because I wasn't sure how to, I thought I had all this amazing information, and if just people would learn it, and realize
Mm,
it, then it would make such a difference. But you're right. Most people were very skeptical and thought I was way off in left field, and they really doubted where the information came from, and they'd never heard this from their doctor, so
mm,
it couldn't be right. Just there was a lot of that. Our kids played, competitive level soccer and volleyball. And so they were in these sport leagues. And oftentimes, coaches, other parents would, question what they were eating, if they were going to have enough energy, for what they were doing. And they were totally fine. They had an extra amount of energy. I would say they were, yeah, so healthy comparatively, even just looking at some kids, and they had friends who had diabetes and other issues, but for whatever reason, yeah, people have a really hard time hearing something that is maybe not mainstream, or just the closed
yeah.
mindedness was hard to get over. And yeah, oftentimes I found myself trying to, been like, no, we're really normal people. We're not, we don't believe in aliens, or whatever. I don't know. But yes, there was a lot of resistance.
Did you personally, so it's yourself, your husband, etc., did you have any kind of reticence, any concern as you went through the journey for your own health and the kids as well? I mean, I asked this question because I think when you've heard something for so long that the world is one way, and then you hear it another way, even if you are completely convinced, there is an element even within yourself of like, well, maybe I'm wrong here. Maybe this is the wrong information and so on. Did you go through any process of sort of self-checking, any kind of like blood testing or any of those kind of things to kind of like verify almost at periods? Yeah, we are okay. It's fine.
Yeah, for sure we did, because I was, after hitting a wall all the time with people, like, well, maybe my kids aren't going to have enough energy, or maybe they're not getting enough calcium. Those questions definitely came up. It was helpful to read other success stories and hear about other people who've done this for a lot longer than we had. But because of the high cholesterol thing that ran in our family, and that my cholesterol immediately dropped when he changed. But when my son had his first real
Mm,
blood work done at age 9, he had high cholesterol, and we'd been eating this way for over 2 years. And so our
wow.
doctor said, we could do this ApoE genetic test, which we did, and found out that I carry the ApoE4. My dad carried it. We had them come do the blood work when they came through town, and my son carried it. So we overproduce cholesterol, and our bodies just don't deal well with any extra cholesterol. Um, because he was so young and had that issue, we had carotid artery tests done like probably for 6 years.
Mm,
So, in the beginning, both he and I had the veins of much older people. And, you could see plaque buildup, which I
mm,
was amazed that they even had standards for children. Apparently, they studied carotid arteries in children in the Korean War for some reason. So that's kind of where they get their baseline. But,
wow.
within a few years, both he and I had gotten rid of all the plaque in our carotid arteries. There was no trace of it anymore. So having those benchmarks to see, like literally, we were watching disease reversal in our bodies. And just 2 years
Wow.
ago, my husband and I did a calcium score test, which is like the heart test to see about plaque in our hearts. And we had perfect scores on that. So it was really helpful. We also had blood work drawn at least once a year, and really finely tuned blood work to see the amount, what our blood was doing with the
Mm.
cholesterol and all that. So, for us, the no oil thing, often I would, like, my mom, loves her olive oil and would, you know, talk about the Mediterranean diet and how wonderful it is. And, but if we started eating out more, eating more oil that way, our blood work numbers would come back different. So for us, it was, we love olive oil. We love really good,
Mm.
bread dipped in olive oil like anybody else. But we could see the difference just in, a month of eating differently. So that really helped us make the changes. And that was helpful to tell people about too. All the skeptics, who were, thinking we were just getting this information off the internet and trying something weird. To say that no, there's medicine, there's science behind this, and we have the numbers to prove it. And a lot of people we knew were dealing with high cholesterol themselves, or pre-diabetes, or blood pressure, and so to tell people, like, you really, it takes some changes, but you can change these things in a really short period of time, was totally new information for them.
Yeah, 100%. The eating out thing sort of fascinates me as well when someone tells me about kind of the full kind of Dr. Campbell approach, if you like, the full whole food, plant-based, no oil, the whole thing. Because I always wonder, like, how practical has that been for you? What's that been like in the real world of getting out and about, visiting other people, maybe Thanksgiving, all of these kind of things, as well as obviously the day-to-days, the eating outs, the treats for the kids, and how have you navigated that? What's your kind of best advice around those kind of subjects?
Yeah, it's tricky. I mean, I think at the end of the day, what's been most helpful is to just say, okay, at home, we don't have any of that stuff. We just eat really
Mm,
whole foods, plant based, no oil at home. And then just to do the best we can outside of that, because it's so difficult. I mean,
yeah,
when my son first got his blood work, and we needed to do 9 weeks of cutting out really any saturated fat to see if that would change his numbers, or if there was something else we needed to do. And he would come home from school almost every day, like with a cookie or a brownie or some treat in his hand. And he would give it to his sister. He would have saved it and say, here you go, and I don't have that kind of discipline. I mean, I was impressed that he could do it, but it was a
yeah,
real light bulb for me that at school they were getting all this crap food, really. It was because they'd
mm,
been good for a substitute, or somebody had a birthday party or whatever, but it was at least 3 times a week they were getting these treats at school. Not to mention the milk posters hanging everywhere and all of that. So, yeah, it's tricky, I would say, and you really don't have a whole lot of control, when you're out somewhere else eating what other places have
yeah.
provided for you. Restaurants, we've tried asking for no oil. Very rarely. Often I've had cooks that were like, we can't do that. They just don't understand that it's possible to, cook some vegetables with no oil. So we really just accept that when we eat out, we're probably going to get some oil. We just try to make the best choices that we
Yeah.
can. Because yeah, it is really difficult. And, now these days there are a lot more options, a lot more plant-based options, but In some ways it's even worse because a lot of these things have a ton of added oil. They're just super highly processed
Mm,
food. So we try to stick with as much whole food as we can. Ethnic foods tend to be better if you can go to a Mexican restaurant or Thai or sushi, something where there are a lot of fruits and vegetables with whole grains as a basis of their meals is a lot easier. Then sometimes,
yeah.
we were in England a few years ago, and it was difficult at times to find something that wasn't just, meat wasn't the main course. And here in the States, it's the same, at
Yeah.
a traditional restaurant. And then it's, having a lot of potatoes with lots of sides of vegetables. But it's doable for sure.
Yeah. It's interesting you mention about sort of the vegan options increasing, but not necessarily the health, not necessarily the kind of the lack of oil, etc. Isn't necessarily a thing. In fact, there's probably more of it. I'm interested to get your perspective on that from a point of view of because I wrestle with this myself. On one hand, you've got the sort of with my vegan hat on, I'm very pleased that there are more options and it's great. On with my kind of health hat on, I have slight concerns that because I have these options, I'm taking them and they're not so good for me. So I'd love to get your view on that.
Yeah, I feel the same. I'm so happy because a lot of these I would say products, because a lot that's what they are, highly processed foods, have introduced a lot of people to the alternatives that are out there, like that they can have a meal without having meat and cheese, for instance. But at the same
Mm.
time, yeah, they are. A lot of them are so unhealthy that then the hardest thing for me is when people say, well, I gave it a go. I went vegan, but it didn't
Uh,
work for me. My cholesterol didn't come down at all. I actually gained weight, and then it's like, well, you have to look at what you were eating. So you weren't eating animals, but if you were eating, fake cheese and meat and Oreo cookies and chips every day, then yeah, that's no surprise that you're not being very healthy right now. So yeah, in the book, I try and tell people to, if you need to, use them as transition foods, along the way, if it's helpful to have a fake, lunch meat in the kid's sandwich or something at school, and that helps transition to enjoying hummus and veggies in your pita or something. I think it's okay. It's just not getting stuck on having those be your main sources of food. That's what we try and do. But it is fun. Like you said, back to the social thing. It's fun to be able to have a burger. If you're out with friends,
mm,
we're not so strict. That we won't have a
yeah.
plant-based burger or something. But these days we try and go with the usually a restaurant has like a homemade black bean burger instead of an Impossible burger. So we try and go with the as whole as you can, like more real food ingredients that haven't been processed 9 million times to make the product.
Do you know, I sort of I lament the bean burger. We don't see as many of them these days, and I think I feel sadder for it. I remember a time, even just 6 years ago, being vegan, that there was probably less plant based, less kind of the plant based substitutes, the Impossibles, the Beyonds, etc. And so you had bean burgers, and we sort of we longed for the kind of the meat substitute. And I'm probably now in the opposite camp where I'm like, I'd love a bean burger, but there's sometimes they're just not there. But when they are, I'm with you. That's the option I'll always pick 100%. I always think they just taste better as well, to be honest with you. But yeah.
Definitely. I was going to say Anne Esselstyn said recently that she feels bad for people who are transitioning right now because of all the options out there. It just makes it so confusing. If you're just getting into this, especially for health reasons, and you see, this whole aisle now of all these replacements, it
Mm.
is hard to wean yourself not only off the, we would say the standard American diet, but the standard Western diet. But then you have all these, tasty options that are full of oil and salt and sugar, all the things that we really want. And to learn, oh gosh, well, I can just eat those instead. It's a hard sell then to go to a black bean burger if you haven't ever had one.
100%, 100%. So let's get right into the book. When did the sort of inspiration come for putting some of these ideas, this kind of way you'd been living with the family, etc.? When did you think this needs to be committed to a book? And I've got something to say on this subject that I think needs to be out there.
Yeah, so for many years we would, like we said, talk to friends and family and try and tell them about the things we were doing, and not until COVID hit, when I couldn't do what I had been doing. I have a degree in geography, but I'd been doing massage and a pain neutralization technique, helping people get out of chronic pain. But when COVID hit, I couldn't do that, and so my kids were at home. My daughter was home doing college online. My son was home doing high school online. And I was just twiddling my thumbs, trying not to drive them or myself crazy. And I went back and got my plant-based nutrition certificate from the T. Colin Campbell Center for Nutrition Studies. And it was great information, not very much new information for me because we'd been doing this for so long, but good to have the kind of title behind it. But COVID was still going on. I still couldn't really get out and, take this to people. So I took their food system and sustainability certificate course as well. And at the end of that, honestly, I think my family was just so tired of listening to me talk about, concentrated animal feeding operations and the evils of the food system and all this stuff. I was like, I need to do something with this. And in just recollecting all the conversations I'd had with other families who, the reasons were like, well, it's too hard, or it's going to be too expensive, or I don't have the time, just all these things that were really not true. And talking with young families who wanted to make the change, but weren't sure how. Also young parents who were like, I don't have time to read the China study. I read blogs now, if I even read at all. And so I aimed to set out to write a book about our experience, something that would be light and fun, but also give enough information so that people could give it a quick go, have it be a quick guide, and give it a try for themselves, and hit that middle ground of somebody who wasn't going to pick up a heavy book to read, but not just be a cookbook either. So that's what I set out to write.
I think that's the thing that really struck me picking up the book was just how approachable it was. And if I think about something like the China study or some of the other amazing texts out there, that they're a little bit intimidating, especially, but if I think when I was new to it, I came in for the environment through Cowspiracy and sort of the wider kind of effect that would have on animals and so on. But I quickly became concerned with my health. And so turned actually to forks over knives and these kind of things, and they were a good gateway. But there wasn't really any text out there that I could find at the time that was going to help me, that wasn't a bit impenetrable, if I'm honest. So was that your experience, and was that where you sort of felt that this is something that's missing and needs to be there?
It was, yeah. I like you read, all the books I could find on this, and they really spanned, just really heavy scientific books, which are helpful, for people who are interested in that, and helpful to know why this makes sense for the planet, for every body on Earth, for sentient beings, all of that. Watched all the documentaries, which, there's a wide range, some are amazing that I suggest all the time to people, and others are, really off-putting to some people. And so, yes, I was trying to kind of get that middle ground where somebody who, say they're interested, they've seen all the things on the shelf, and their doctor told them they need to, lower their cholesterol or lower their blood pressure, whatever, could pick it up, have a laugh, and read it. Or somebody who, like us, our whole family hasn't adopted this way of eating. Our family of 4 has, but to be able to give this to, a parent, there are a lot of people who are raising their kids this way, and their parents are so concerned that their kids aren't getting what they need, you know. So I wanted to write something that was a quick enough and easy enough read that it was accessible for anybody to grab a hold of. You know, it's like the beginning is the why. Why is this important for our bodies and for the planet? And then the how, like how to put this into place. Because like you were saying, you know, in the beginning especially, it's difficult to navigate. Okay, I have to go out to lunch with my coworkers. What am I supposed to do? You know, I still want to have friends over. How do we navigate, you know, doing potlucks or having friends over? Going to friends' houses, all that kind of stuff. What do I do about the food that my kids are getting at school? All those things. So yeah, it was kind of a meant to be that book in the middle that you could pick up, get the information, give it a go, and then hopefully people do at some point read the Bible, is what I call the China study. You know, I mean, it's got a lot of great information, and hopefully it leads people to do some more research, but is enough to get them going.
Yeah, well, I think 100% you're hitting that mark, that right in the middle, that sweet spot that I think absolutely needs to be there. Like sometimes I think if our research is either a choice between sort of social media or like the China study, there's sometimes nothing in between. The social media feels a little bit too light and maybe a bit frivolous, and like, is this legitimate? You know, do I feel comfortable with this? And you know, the China study may be a little bit impenetrable. So it kind of, you know, it's great to have this kind of middle ground, just to give some folks an insight who are perhaps thinking about picking up the book, etc. What would be, you know, when it comes to the how, what would be some of those kind of top tips to get you started? Maybe if you're you know, you've got a family of your own and you're thinking about transitioning that family.
Yeah, you know, I walk people through making it an easy, just give it a go for 10 days. So I think the first is really knowing yourself. So you have to know, are you the type of the person that can do the black and white and go, yeah, we're just going to get rid of everything in the kitchen. You know, we talk about cleaning out the kitchen and the cupboards and all that. Or are you somebody who needs a little more time, who, you know, will add something in every week, maybe not think about taking things out because that's often more hard for people. But, you know, maybe it's adding in some greens with every meal, or, you know, or just a glass of warm water to start your day off. You know, some people just start there. So learning about yourself, like how you function best, how you take on doing new challenges is helpful. And then, yeah, you know, easiest with kids, and not just with kids, even adults, is to figure out, like, make a list. What are our favorite foods? You know, we sat down and asked the kids, okay, what do you like to eat most? You know, so they were young at that time. It was burgers, it was lasagna, enchiladas, you know, macaroni and cheese, all these things. So we just wrote them down, and then looked up vegan replacements for those things. How do we make these things without the cheese or the meat or all that stuff? And so I think, you know, it wasn't vegan replacements like bought off the shelf. It was making these things at home, but coming up with some recipes that are similar to what you are used to eating, but transitioning to those. You know, we played around with quite a few different burger recipes, for instance, to find our favorite, and then just made that a normal, you know, at least once a week kind of thing. Sometimes we would have it more than once a week because we all loved it. So finding things that work, it really helpful. Like I mentioned, we did getting our blood work done before we tried this, and then, you know, give it a time period and get the blood work done at the end. It can be super helpful because sometimes you're making all these changes, which can feel like a lot of work, but you don't really feel your cholesterol dropping, right? You can't see that in the mirror. And so to get the blood work and to go, oh my gosh, things are really happening, can be really helpful for people. So that at the end of that 10 days, you know, when you're sleeping better, you're feeling better, you have more energy, your skin's starting to clear up, all these things that just naturally happen by eating real good food. You maybe go, okay, well, I'll give it another 15 days and see how it goes. So yeah, just giving people some tools to stay out of the weeds, you know, not get too hung up on, do I need to add a half a cup of blueberries every day, or, you know, all those things, but I kind of give people some tips that are helpful to just give it a go.
You mentioned earlier about school, and I'm kind of fascinated by that subject, obviously myself, as we talk about it just before we got started. got a little boy who's 4. He's just started school now, and it's a whole new ball game of navigating just what he does and doesn't eat, etc. As let alone the why he doesn't and doesn't, why he doesn't eat those things, etc. Any top tips on that kind of subject? Kids at school as they kind of grow up, etc. On how to navigate those kind of conversations and their health and so on and so forth.
Oh man, I wish I had better tips. I would say, just trying to be an advocate as much as possible. I think when we learn for ourselves, and for the planet, for the animals, for, how this affects everybody, I think, it also helps to go, there are other people who are affected by this who don't know it yet, maybe. I'm thinking about people who can't digest milk. There's a large percentage of the population who cannot actually digest milk, but this is being given in the States, required to be given at school. So there are things like lawsuits going on now, so that, there can be an offering of something that isn't a cow's milk at meals. But that wasn't happening really, 13 years ago. So yeah, it's confusing. I would say it's so confusing for people because, at our schools, all the schools have posters of, drink milk for strong bones and all that. And you're really up against such a big fight when our government is subsidizing milk and therefore, telling people. And then when you go to the doctor, and most doctors, haven't had this education, they've had a little bit of nutrition education, but that's mostly like the biochemistry part of it. And so a lot of people are super confused, understandably so. So I think educating yourself so that the truth about what your child does or doesn't need, and then being able to stand up to people and just try to educate and advocate for those who cannot have milk. I talked with a chef, and he would take a card. He printed out this card, and when he went to a restaurant, he would pass it to the server. He would often call ahead to give to the chef, and the card on it said something like, I'm combating heart disease, and so I cannot have these things. So please, could you make sure my meal doesn't have these things? And, he said, I just hand them out readily because it's true. I am combating heart disease. And really, we all are trying to combat heart disease, right? So I think if I had to do it over again, I might have one of those cards to put in my child's folder at school or something and say, look, we can't have these things. And if people were interested as to why, then I would give more information, but maybe just to do it that way because just people are so confused out there. I would like to advocate more for children now, just because there's so many health problems that are being developed at such a young age, and in no small part because of what our children are being fed at home, but also out in public, in school, and all those places as well.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's a top bit of advice that kind of advocating for, and not being kind of shy to be that advocate for those things. I think that's so important. Like when you're in those kind of conversations, it can be, it could be really easy to default to almost like being overly polite and being, I don't want to cause a fuss. And I think it's important to use our voices in this space. Otherwise, things aren't going to change if there aren't enough of us talking about them. So, and I think you just made me think about the first bit of advocation, if that's a word, that we had to do with our son. Where there wasn't a vegan menu at all. There was no option that was listed. There was no labeling on the menu. And through some conversations, there now is. And that even that, I suppose, is a small step. And if enough people do those kind of things, it starts to move things forward. And then these kind of organisations realise that they may have to make some adjustments for other people. So yeah, I love that bit of advice. I think that's kind of spot on, reaffirmed where my mind was at actually. Just thinking about the reaction of the book. How's that been? How have folks taken to it who you've kind of been able to give a copy to?
Oh, it's been super exciting, to hear from people who decided to give it a go, made a change, have lost 35 pounds in 5 weeks, or are no longer on a $400 medication, every month, who have cut their food bills in
Wow.
half. It's been really wonderful to see people pick it up and go with it. More so than I thought. I wasn't sure if this would strike a chord, but even talking with some of my heroes, T. Colin Campbell and John McDougall, getting some amazing endorsements for the book, but finding out from them too, it fits. It's a place where there wasn't a lot of information, something that you can read in less than 4 hours that will give you what you need to know to get started. I think it definitely was kind of a hole in the resources. So I'm excited to hear that people are getting what they need out of it, which has been really, really gratifying.
100%. Like I said, I think it's absolutely filling a gap there, isn't there? So I appreciate the book, appreciate all you're doing in this space. I think it's fantastic. And just chatting to you about parental issues is to me, I think is really important. So I appreciate that about the book and about you as well. So thank you. Where would folks go to get a copy?
So probably easiest is my website, www.forforksakebook.com. The book is on Amazon and Barnes and Noble, but Amazon actually, fun fact, will not let me run ads because they first said the information was claiming, medical, it would change medical stuff, even though I have a disclaimer at the beginning saying check with your doctor. When we pushed back on that, they actually pulled that out. And then they said, no, the title could be taken as offensive. So they won't let me run ads, but they still are selling the book,
Interesting.
which is, very interesting. But anywhere you find books, you can purchase the book. I also recorded an audiobook. So if you're someone, who likes to listen and take your walk or whatever,
Amazing.
there's an audiobook as well.
I personally, as you can imagine, love an audiobook, so I will 100% be checking that out as well. Although having a copy of the book is awesome too. Like I say, I think it's unique in that regard that it's easy, it's approachable, and many of the kind of text on this subject aren't so, or they're cookbooks. It's kind of one or the other. They're not kind of like easy ways to get into it that feel kind of safe. So I think it's a great resource, and thank you so much for it. Look, it's been great chatting with you, Rachel. I'm going to put links in the show notes so folks can pick up a copy, and definitely advise they do. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.